Welcome to the Scarlet Faithful podcast. I am Aaron Breitman, back with David Anderson doing positional previews for Rutgers football ahead of the kickoff of the 2023 season. Today we are talking about wide receivers, obviously big, important group for this offense to take a step forward. A lot of question marks there in terms of production based on the production lost from last season. David, thanks so much for being back. Let's start with the two often talked about transfers: Jaquay Jackson, the Division II All-American, and Nassim Brantley, the FCS All-Conference player. What do you expect out of them, and how important is their impact for this group?
It's an excellent and probably one of the top 2 or 3 questions facing the entire program at the moment. When you look at it, last year, of the 2 deep heading into the season last year, 5 of those 6 players are no longer with the program, right? So you had to go to the transfer portal, and I think for what Rutgers offers, they did about as good as you could do in terms of who you're recruiting, because really what they can offer is plenty of snaps and an opportunity for a player to showcase that didn't previously have this type of stage to kind of show themselves to play at the next level if it's in the cards for them. I guess between the two of them, you could start with either one. Let me start with Jackson, because he's coming down from a lower level of Division II, but he was an absolute monster. He had 77 catches for 1,178 yards and 13 TDs last year, again, at a lower level, but he just was dominating people. And so that gives me confidence that even if he's not dominating people, that he'll be able to make plays in the Big Ten. He's listed at 6'3", but I'm not sure if he looks that big, but he definitely plays like that with his athleticism, jumping and catching balls, securing balls that may be a kind of off angles, making some circus catches. I mean, he brought everything to the table at a lower level. Short passes, long passes, off-target passes. He kind of did everything. I mean, so can he do it at Rutgers? Let's hope so. I mean, any other thoughts on Jackson?
Well, what I wanted to know, just in terms of both of them, Brantley and Jackson, is we talked about it in other position groups, but the adjustment from going to FBS and specifically the Big Ten. How much does the speed impact the receivers, and does that impact just in terms of their catchability? Because I think one thing that we've seen in the past with Wimsatt with accuracy that doesn't really get mentioned too much, and we'll touch more on it with quarterbacks, is that there have been some drops for him, right? So we know that for this offense to take a step forward, they have to reduce the drops, both for Wimsatt's confidence, but also for to be able to move the chains. And I guess how much does the increased speed at this level potentially impact that?
I don't think drops should matter. Like I owe credit to Richie Schneiderite for making this point. Like, you either have the skill of the skill position or you don't. And these guys definitely have the skill part. The one thing that I will say is, for example, with Brantley, right? Brantley, like we talked about with other positions, if he was just scored for the Big Ten last year, he would have been the 16th ranked receiver, which is pretty good. I mean, that's borderline, number one receiver type stuff. Now, again, that was against lesser competition. My concern with Brantley is, despite his large size, his catch radius isn't as big as you would think it should be. He catches a lot of balls like in front of his chest, even though it's in his hands, but it's in front of his chest or kind of just off the side of his shoulder. He doesn't show the same ability as Jackson to kind of snatch a ball from a very high pointed place. And so he's not going to be able to, at this level, kind of jump over a guy and still catch it near his chest. Like that size, that he's not going to be able to do in the case of Brantley. I do think he has good hands, but he generally has been catching balls on the inside. So we're going to have to see if he's going to be able to, catch more passes that are going to have to be fit into tight windows, or they're going to have to be placed in a position where the defensive back can't make a play on it. He's not going to be able to use his size just to make those type of plays. As we talked about for those who had listened to the tight end preview with Sean Bowman, there were times where he just kind of jumped over people in the red zone and caught the ball. That he's not going to be able to Randy Moss people at this level, I don't believe. But
Yeah.
overall, I think he's a pretty solid receiver in the case of Brantley. I think most of Jackson's skill set is going to translate,
Yeah, I think the thing with Brantley,
even though he's coming from a lower level.
sorry, yeah, the thing with Brantley is he's been injured, right? So he missed a lot of
Yeah.
spring. I think that it's been a little bit of an issue during training camp. So how much can he acclimate and be ready for the start of the season, and how much of an impact can he make right away? Obviously, they need him to, but I think that's something to watch as well. Now talking about Chris Long and Isaiah Washington, kind of the two veterans in the group, which is not,
Right.
Long. It's only his second year. He showed flashes last year. I thought I'm really high on his potential. And then Isaiah Washington's been around for a long time, and he's always been a little bit inconsistent. What do you think those two can bring to the table this season?
I guess let's start with Washington. He's the senior member on the block as a true freshman. He really looked good. I mean, I think he may have only caught 18 passes in that season where Nunzio Campanella was calling the plays with Johnny Lang at quarterback. But I mean, he was the difference maker in that win against Liberty. So I think that Washington, like you said, he has been a little bit inconsistent. I mean, if you look at his scoring over time, he's always ranged between a 56 and a 62. So he could be like, if he's just that, he brings something. If not, then he bringing a lot more to the table as a wide receiver. I think they can use his height like they do with Brantley and Jackson, and I think that he offers something in up and down. His Isaiah Washington's been up and down. His ratings are fairly consistent. He's got 49 career catches, but only 3 of them were last year. And so that's kind of where you say to yourself, okay, has he plateaued? Does he have more that they just have not unlocked yet? Uh, we haven't even talked about wide receivers coach Dave Brock, who was an offensive coordinator with the program about 10 years ago, and what he's been able to do with a lot of his players that bring physical ability to the table. So I'm curious what Washington will do. He's always been able to produce those highlight reel plays, especially in spring games or scrimmages that we've seen, but he did it even as a true freshman. So I'm hopeful that, there is something there, and it was just that he was behind guys in the depth chart that were proven and that the coaching staff trusted. Anything else you want to say on Isaiah Washington before we talk to the other returner and Chris Long?
I just think it's consistency, right? He's shown flashes before, but can he put it all together? Can this last season for him be the year that he steps up and becomes a reliable pass catcher for Rutgers? They obviously need it. And I think you're right. He's gotten maybe a little bit unfairly dismissed, but I think it's just based on his lack of production last season. And I think it's key. But Chris Long is someone I'm really high on. I think he showed flashes last year and has a certain skill set that, a big play ability that this team could certainly utilize.
For sure. I mean, what we saw from Long when he got promoted from a 3 to a 4-star prospect out of high school was just his ability to adjust to maybe not were perfectly thrown and then make plays after the catch. So it wasn't just that he is able, when you talk about skill set, it wasn't just that he's able to secure an off target pass. It's that he was able to not only secure it, but then turn it into positive yardage. And that yards after the catch is probably going to be really important in this offensive scheme because you have a quarterback who you're trying to just work his way along, make simple reads, and Long can bring that after the catch ability that we saw from him at the end of his high school career, and he has shown. I mean, he showed it last year on that amazing play he made against Michigan, and that should not be dismissed. The other thing I'll add about Long, despite his build, he's not like one of the bigger receivers on the team. He definitely scored really well as a run blocker. When you look at the grades from Pro Football Focus, and again, I think for receiver, run blocking is something that should be fairly easy to tell. Like, did the guy block the man he was supposed to block or not? And he did a pretty good job with that. One thing that just an overall thing we saw from Rutgers receivers in 2020 and 2021, they were the best blocking receiving unit in the conference. Last year, you can guess, blocking receivers in the conference were the Minnesota Gophers. They had 4 of the top 14 receivers according to Pro Football Focus,
Wow.
despite the fact that a lot of their production was not as an actual receiver. A lot of it came as a blocker or in other phases of the offense. So I hope that Long, I mean, this is going to be the best coaching he's ever had, for sure, between offensive coordinator and even more so his position coach. So I think that they can get a lot out of him. And I think that, yeah, maybe at an Ohio State, he'd be playing, cornerback. But at Rutgers, he brings something to the receiver room that I don't know if anyone else does just yet.
Yeah, great point. Shiano touched on him after the scrimmage on Saturday, or at some point this preseason, just saying that if he can stay healthy, he's a legit Big Ten receiver. So definitely excited for his potential. Now moving to the slot, obviously a crucial spot. I think especially with Wimsatt, being able to get production out of that position is really key for the offense overall. Christian Dremel, I think, surprised some people in the spring, won that spring award for most improved. And going into the training camp, sounds like he's ahead of Rashad Rochelle on the depth chart. Obviously, Rochelle oozes athleticism. What do you think the potential is there for both of those players?
I guess let's start with Dremel. Came on as a walk-on from Don Bosco Prep, and even at a very early, point in his career, he was catching passes against Penn State from Cole Snyder. And you're like, okay, I understand that this guy is not big, it's not insanely fast, but he tends to have a knack to make plays, which you have to if you're playing. He had to have that size even in the Big North, right? So I think that there is something to be said there. Now, our defense is going to scheme to stop him? No. If they were to scheme to stop him, okay, then there might be that much he can offer. But if you scheme properly, and especially if he's coming out of the slot where he has a little bit more of a free release, there's no reason that he can't make those, catches for 4 yards on first down that we just never saw Rutgers do. They,
Mm-hmm.
If a quarterback comes out and your slot man's uncovered and it's 1st and 10, like just do a quick hitter out there, right, for 4 yards, and that's free yardage basically. And for whatever reason, Rutgers has not felt comfortable doing that over the last few years. I think they'll feel a little bit more comfortable with Dremel if he's in that spot because of his hands, and just they're going to have confidence that, okay, he's going to catch the ball, get 4 yards, and then move on to the next down. I think he can offer a lot in that area, and that's where, when teams are stacking the box against Rutgers, that there's opportunities for the slot man to get those quick throws. Did you have anything else you want to say on Dremel before we talk about Rashad
Well,
Rochelle?
I think it's a great point about those, quick throws on first down, because I think, how much does Rutgers try to kind of complement the run game, with those early down short yardage passes to try to get chunks of yards, so it's not, you're not as predictable on the run on first down, but also you're kind of avoiding potentially, those long third down situations.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious to see. Now, Rashad Rochelle, hands, we'll see. Because this is a guy who played quarterback in high school, and he was a running back last year. And he actually was pretty productive as a running back in all facets, despite his size and inexperience. So, as a full-time slot receiver, we don't know how much growth that we'll be able to see from him, but there's a lot of potential there. Like we talked about with Long, he's the other guy on this team that has some potential for yards after the catch, and Jackson, who I mentioned, that kind of brings everything to the table. But I mean, Rashad Rochelle is the guy that you might be able to throw that 1st and 10 and expect 4 yards. He might get you 20. Like he might be able to do that. Might be. I don't know. We'll see. But he definitely has the quickness, the agility, which is why he might be in the mix when we talk about special teams as a return man.
Yep.
Like he has that, but how far along in his development as a receiver is he in such limited action thus far? I don't know, but he's a huge wild card for this team. And when you start adding it up on the offense, there's very little we can say that we know this guy is going to be what he is. Like Johnny Langan, after that, it's which of these guys is next factor steps up and where can they reach this year in terms of their potential? I don't know. What are your thoughts on Rochelle? What do you think he's going to do this year?
Well, I do think, to his credit, like, he seems very coachable. He's been very positive since he's been at Rutgers, and hearing all great things about his work ethic and everything like that. So I think they're definitely, want to find a role for him. And I think Dremel is kind of, it's a good situation for Rochelle's long-term development, because it's pushing him, right? It's forcing him to get better. And it's not the type of thing where he just kind of got the position because there's no one else there.
Because there's nobody, right?
Right. So, I think it is something where maybe, you see Dremel more in the lead in the beginning. And then if Rochelle can make some strides throughout the year, maybe perhaps at the end of the season, we're seeing him more utilized. But he has obvious athleticism and obvious playmaking ability. Can they harness that this season? I think long term they can, but I think how much can they get out of him this year is, like you said, a huge impact on the offense overall. And that
I
leads
wanted to make one more. Can I make one more point on Long?
go.
He's a really good blocker, even though he's inexperienced in the pass game. So one of the things that Straka did a ton, he doesn't like to run a lot of running back screens, but he likes to run a lot of screens where you have 3 receivers out. So you actually have 2 slot men. So you could have a 4 receiver set or maybe even a flex tight end. And you're very dependent on your slot receivers to block, especially outside corners, so that the outside receiver can come across, right? So those type of plays, which we did not see a lot at Rutgers, but like Leonte Carew would just do those, even though he's catching a screen, but he's the outside man on the line. And so if Long can offer, blocking ability that the defensive back has to both respect the pass and the run with him, then that offers something else that might allow them to do more passes to other receivers on the perimeter when they're in either a bunch or 3 receivers out to the side. And again, he's pretty inexperienced, but what he's shown on tape so far is pretty good in that area.
Yeah, great point. And then really kind of last thing on wide receivers is the biggest wild card in terms of the freshmen. Rutgers brought in a ton of receivers in this incoming freshman class. Some of them enrolled early. We know that Ian Strong is competing for time. Brian Fonseca reported an article about how he's made a lot of strides and is getting real reps in training camp. I've heard good things about him. We'll see how much of an impact he makes day one. But there's a lot of intriguing receivers there. Dylan Braithwaite, Jesse Fury, Devon Fuse. I know you wanted to touch on a couple others, but overall, I guess, how important is it for this group to make an impact this year? How realistic is it? And then also, what do you think of this group overall, just in terms of the long-term outlook for Rutgers?
Yeah, I mean, leads me to my question: is this year's wide receivers last year's linebackers? In terms of you have very little proven depth. Can you kind of patch it together for 1 year, maybe even with just Brantley and Jackson getting the bulk of the actual catches? Like maybe it's like that, or you have one of these freshmen kind of rise up and play. Strong, I love Strong out of high school. I mean, there's a reason he went from like the 10th best prospect in the state to number 1 by some recruiting sources in the span of 1 year, in playing a variety of positions, offense, defense. I think this team, just like Chris Long, they need him on offense. That's just what they need. And so a guy like him, does he have enough physical tools to make a little bit of an impact, even as he's improving things like his route running? I don't know. I think it's quite common, more than we think, that true freshmen can make an impact at wide receiver. And so there's definitely an opportunity there. The other freshmen, like you said, I mean, Braithwaite looked pretty good when we saw him I think we saw him in the spring game. Fuse, he was a quarterback in high school as well. So I'm not sure if he's as far along as maybe Strong might be. So if we do see contributions from a true freshman, it's probably going to be Strong. And then a lot harps back to kind of the point I was making all over the place about like Chris Long and Rochelle making like blocking from the slot. Like, do they have confidence in Ian Strong if he is having to just block people on the outside? He definitely has the physical size. I don't know if his strength is going to translate to the Big Ten level, but I don't think they're going to play one of these freshmen if they don't have confidence in them, as a blocker as well as being able to catch passes.
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to how are those other guys doing, right? Is Brantley stepping up, Jackson, and at what point, if the production is not there, into the season based on the record and everything, how much do they just kind of turn it over and let the freshmen get more time to get more experience for the following season? Another guy we didn't mention, Max Patterson, had 2 touchdowns in the spring
game.
Who knows how much that will translate? Haven't heard too much about him in training camp, but he is a guy not to forget about. But overall, final thoughts just on this group.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about Patterson, it's a good segue into my last point, which is, he shows some instincts that maybe some of the other guys haven't shown as much of. Like in terms of, I think he might get snaps because when the play breaks down or a quarterback's rolling out and he needs to adjust his angle to give the quarterback a window to throw the ball, he showed that in very limited action and very poor weather conditions within the spring game. There's a guy who bounced back between defensive back and wide receiver. Shiano has mentioned over time, like really when a guy's in his first year, you just want him to get his feet wet. You want him to get acclimated to college life, to being in a football program, being in these meetings. And that's where how quick can these freshmen come along, right? Are they going to be able to make an impact or not? You just have even one, and a little bit of another guy step up, like that might get you through the season. And then you can determine, okay, which of these guys are part of either a long-term future at wide receiver, maybe they're playing another position or not. And that's why, again, I think that the reason they brought in the two transfers is to get through this year. And then they shouldn't have to as heavily lean on the transfer portal in upcoming, seasons. So that's
Great.
my final thought on the wide receiver position, which, this could be a position of strength out of nowhere, or we could be just really struggling to, develop our quarterback because receivers are not getting the job done.
Great stuff, David Anderson. Really appreciate it. Thanks for listening and watching to this preview, and stay tuned for more positional previews from us leading up to the season.